The member from Huron-Bruce.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation. On Saturday, May 6, 17-year-old Tammy Kiash failed to make curfew at her Thunder Bay group home. Tragically, her body was discovered in the Nebing-McIntyre floodway. Between Saturday and Sunday, no one in her family or the North Caribou First Nation community or the Anishinaabe-Aski Nation was notified that she had not returned home. Nobody, Speaker, was looking out for this young woman. Sadly, in total, 4 Indigenous youth living in group homes have died in the last 6 months. Why, Speaker, is the minister sitting idly by and letting this happen under his watch?
Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation.
Well, thank you for that question. We take these issues very seriously. I can tell you that yesterday afternoon, the Minister of Children and Youth Services and I spent the afternoon at the Native Centre on Spadina Road from about 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock, in which we discussed the issues specifically surrounding First Nation children and the issues they have in care, being taken into care, how they're dealt with in care. At that meeting was, I said, Minister of Children and Youth Services, myself, and the leadership from First Nations communities across Ontario. They shared with us their very frank and their very poignant stories. But more than their frank and poignant stories, they threw solutions out. They placed solutions on the table about how to deal with these, and I'd be happy to deal with that in the supplementary.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that update, but we have to remember June 28th marks the one-year anniversary since the Thunder Bay inquiry resulted in 145 recommendations on how to better support Indigenous youth in care. One recommendation dealt with the development of policies dealing with missing students, specifically the timely filing of missing person reports. A year later, though, Speaker, Indigenous youth are still dying, and their families and communities have no safeguard. Speaker, today we've seen more calls for action, so I ask the minister, will you support the call from the Ontario Children's Aid Society and NAND leadership and call a coroner's inquest into these recent deaths?
Thank you.
Minister of Children and Youth Services.
Children and Youth Services.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for the question because this is a really important issue, and like the minister who was responsible for Indigenous Affairs and Reconciliation said yesterday, we had a very meaningful conversation with the leadership, with chiefs right across the province here in Toronto. And in addition to that, Mr. Speaker, I've been to many different jurisdictions across this province and spoken to young people and to leaders and elders within communities. And we have a plan moving forward when it comes to group homes and children in care, a new blueprint that we will be bringing forward very shortly with some substantial changes. But, Mr. Speaker, the most important piece here is returning jurisdiction back to Indigenous communities and making sure that those communities can care for their children. And that's the direction that we're moving in. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.